Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee. Come and take your coffee break with me.
So welcome back to Coffee Break with Candace. We're so glad you're joining us this week. I have another incredible guest, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and tell us more.
Okay, well, my name is Lionel B Gittens Jr. I was born in Atlantic City in February 6, 1940. I had some loving parents, Lionel and Maddie Gittens, and they took care of me very well. First of all, I wanted to thank you and your audience, your listening audience, for allowing me to be here today and to give you a little excerpt of some of the multiple stories that I have that I happened to get through in my lifetime. So, Candace, today, I want to tell a story about how I went some 6,000 miles overseas and met the man I was looking for in the middle of the night in a deserted country.
I look forward to hearing your story.
Okay, well, like I said, my parents came from a humble beginnings back in Atlantic City in the 1940s. And they both only had like 8th grade education. And they were both very intelligent people, but like I said, you didn't have that education, options. So, but I was a curious kid and and a very adventurous kid. So I used to just go out and go around Atlantic City, and I started running around there because I didn't have any fear, and I was just an explorer, and I needed to see everything I could see. So what I used to do is when I was like 5 years old, I used to sneak out of my aunt's second floor window, slide down the roof, go down the pole, and jump over a fence because I wanted to follow these Shetland ponies that they used to rent on the beach where people would rent the horses out. And I loved the ponies so much. So I would go down New Jersey Avenue behind the ponies and, enjoy the beach and everything. And then if I got bored with the ponies after a while, which is I was doing every week, I would start strolling up the boardwalk. And when I strolled up the boardwalk, I used to see the Steel Pier and all these movie theaters and people on the beach, people swimming, and Lucy the Elephant, and I used to eat the Turkish tappies, and people with fancy carriages were being pushed up and down the board. So it was really exciting to a little kid at 5 years old. And, I just saw, the more I saw, the more I went. I used to go many, many blocks up the boardwalk and just nobody knew where I was. And I would,
So does that mean if nobody knew where you were, does that mean you got a lot of spankings?
Yes, ma'am. Every day. Sometimes 2, 3 of them. It was okay. It was okay. I'll tell you why. See, Atlantic City was like the Las Vegas, but it was on the East Coast. And in the 40s, that was the place to go in New York, Philadelphia, and all these different places used to go there because they had more than Las Vegas because they had the beaches and the boats, and they had many nightclubs. They had the 500 Club where the white people went, and then they had Club Harlem on Kentucky Avenue where the black entertainers and all the people used to do. And they all used to wear these fancy dressed up clothes, and I'd be out at 8, 9, 10 o'clock looking at the cars and looking at the people, and the police are looking for me. And if I saw the police before they saw me, there was no way they could catch me because I was a skinny little kid. I could run fast, over a fence, under a bush. This is how my life was in Atlantic City. So I did get the whippings, and all my aunts and my mother beat me. But like I said, I could dream all night after all the things I had seen all day. So every day was a new day. Anyway, so our life in Atlantic City was like that until I was like 1948, 1947, 1940. I was around 8 years old, and my mother and father moved out of Atlantic City and moved into a small town called Burlington, New Jersey. And when we moved into the Dumbark Homes. That was a black project. The white project was on the other side of the highway. But my parents, they worked 2 jobs. And most of the time they worked their day job, one at my mother at General Motors, my father at John A. Roebling as an engineer. And in the evenings, they would do odd jobs and other things to hustle up extra money, and they put their cash together, and then they started saving, and then they started buying these old single family homes, and my father would renovate them, and then later on they would buy rooming houses, and then they would get apartment buildings, and so they kept renting these things out. But I worked with my father from age 8 to about 18, 17, working in all these different trades. So I learned all kinds of things: wallpaper, plumbing, electrical. I learned all kinds of trades in that early stage of my life. And then after high school, I spent like 11 years in trade schools in the evenings and weekends. And I learned to do, I was a coppersmith, I was a tinsmith, a pattern maker. Then I won a 5-year apprenticeship in the Roebling Steel Mill, and I became a first-class sheet metal mechanic. And then I attended more schools, and then I went into HVAC, which is heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Then I learned more skills as electrical work and mechanical work and basic construction, and learning a lot about many commercial and industrial trades.
So obviously you had a really impressive background. And so somehow this all led you to Kuwait. So tell us more.
So after the years of education, I started my business in Burlington, New Jersey, and it was called Gittens Enterprises. We grew from, we were general contractors, and we grew from doing renovations on homes and stuff like that, and additions. Then we did schools, and we grew up the office buildings, and then we started getting commercial projects and military projects, and all kinds of prestigious contracts all over the New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia. And then all of a sudden we got a very prestigious job to do some HVAC subcontract at Valley Park Place Casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So that's when we really started to accelerate. So after that, we did some buildings, and we did buildings in Newark Airport, the Marriott Hotel, and then we did a Prudential building, an 80-story building in Newark, New Jersey, and then we did a train terminal in Kearney, New Jersey, and the VA hospital critical care unit in East Orange. We worked on about 30 or 40 U.S. bases all throughout New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia, and Delaware. But then we were working on a new project, which was called Liberty 2 in Philadelphia. It was a 61-story high-rise building downtown Philadelphia near the City Hall. And we were about 80% complete. And then unfortunately, before I knew it, the contractor from Texas went bankrupt. And when he went bankrupt, all the subcontractors went downhill. They got hurt, and naturally we got injured financially too, very deeply. So we were in a financial thing at that time. We're in a financial negative problems, and at that time I felt very depressed and lost. And that was very devastating to happen to us after we had worked so hard and given our blood, sweat, and tears, and got up so high, and then got knocked down for no fault of your own. Anyway, what was going on the other side of the world during that time was the dictator, Saddam Hussein, had invaded the wealthy oil well company of Kuwait on August the 2nd, 1990. Anyway, Saddam's forces came into Kuwait in the middle of the night. And when the people woke up, they were already downtown. And within 2 days, they had occupied the whole country. And then while the people were under occupation, the Kuwaiti people were getting murdered, they were getting hung, they were getting raped, they were getting robbed. They were robbing tons and thousands of tons of materials from Kuwait and taking it into Iraq every day. And then they were stealing all the Mercedes, the Jaguars, they stole all those automobiles, and took it all out of the country. So what happened after that was in late March, I was sitting in New Jersey at my friend's home, And my wife and I was there, and we were watching television, and we were watching the devastation that was going on in Kuwait, and the oil fires were all blasting out of control. And so a light bulb came in my head, and I told them, I said, well, listen, I think I'm going to Kuwait. And they all turned around and looked at me as if I had lost my mind. And they thought, they said, oh, this man has totally lost his mind now. He thinks he's going to go overseas, go take a company over there, go in the Middle East, in the desert somewhere, and get a job and think that he's going to be successful. And you got to be out of it. So all kinds of negative things, but I ain't paid a whole lot of attention. And I just went on and then told him I'm going to just, I'm going to stay with what I want to do. And then, so I defended my position, and then I went home and we talked to my wife for a couple of days, and she got convinced, and then we began our process to go overseas. My process to send me overseas. So.
And what is that like? It doesn't sound like that's a small thing to begin a process like that. I mean, did you have to do anything in advance?
I won't go into the details because you'll be about a week getting this first story out.
I love it. Okay.
There's a whole lot of stuff in between there.
Okay.
There's tons of it, trust me. Anyway, so I defended my position, like I told you, and then I explained why I was going over there, because I had faith that if I got over there, I can get some contracts over there because the country's war torn, and I would be able to pull my company back up out of financial situation at that time. So anyway, my wife got convinced, and then I got my first passport. That was in 1991, and then I had to go get a visa to get into Kuwait, but they weren't issuing any visas at that time because the airport was burnt out. And there was no government. Everybody has fled the country. They all have ran out the country. The country was literally empty.
Wow.
So, okay. So anyway, I got the passport, got all of that stuff. But in the meantime, there was a seminar in Washington, D.C. So I went down to the seminar, and the seminar was for the Corps of Army Engineers, and they put on whatever they did. And I got the name of a guy named Colonel Lucrucio, who was the guy in charge of the rebuilding of Kuwait, a lot of the infrastructure, plus a lot of contracts. So they told me, said, well, if you go over there, perhaps you can get some contracts. Okay, fine. In the meantime, they also mentioned the name of a company called Bechtel. Bechtel was in charge of putting out all the 735 oil well fires that were blasting all over the place. It's 13,000 degrees of temperature, and flames were jumping 200 feet in the air, and smoke was also high, and everything was black, and oil was all the whole like miles, and it was just a black oil thing, totally covered up, even blocked out the sun in the daytime. I mean, 12 o'clock, you had to put your headlights on. Anyway, that was Bechtel. So I left there, and then I went back home, and then my wife and I had got all our stuff together, and she took me up to New York City, and we kissed goodbye, and I got on the plane and flew 7 hours, and I landed in London. And that also was quite interesting because the English was not our English, and everything was different over there. Anyway, so I stayed at the airport for about 3 hours looking around. And then we took off for Bahrain, the country of Bahrain, because that's the only country I could get a visa to, because I couldn't, and that was very close. So if I can get to Bahrain, I can drive into Saudi Arabia and then drive up to Kuwait. Fine, that's the way I went. Okay, so anyway, on that flight, I met an Arab guy, and his name, just before we landed, and this is 6,000 miles away from home, I struck up a conversation with this Arab guy, and his name was Muhammad Ali. And I told him, he asked me, he said, oh, Mr. Gittens, where you going? After a while. I said, well, I want to go to the country of Kuwait and help them rebuild their country. I'm a general contractor from New Jersey. So he said, yeah. I said, but the only thing, I don't have a visa to get in Kuwait. He said, all right, well, why don't you meet me tomorrow morning at the Kuwait embassy in Bahrain? And I'll cut a little short story. Yes, I did. 8 a.m. in the morning, I met him at the front door, and we went into the building, a big building, and we saw crowds and crowds of people waiting for papers to be processed and that and all that kind of stuff. And then we went in past the crowd and went to a set of elevators and went up to the next floor. And then we came out and it was a beautiful hallway, all decorated with Arabic decor, blah, blah, blah. And then we went down to this huge office. And we went in the office and this handsome Kuwaiti guy was sitting there with his white stuff all pressed and his kutra and his regalia around his head. And he was really a nice looking guy. And so Muhammad went over to him and introduced me and told him what my purpose was. I wanted to go help his country. And the guy started smiling. And then we had a little conversation. And I told him, I said, well, you know, I have another friend. I said, Muhammad Ali Clay, who I used to hang out with in Philadelphia. So the boxers, so they all knew him, and that was it. The party was on for 1 hour, and they just gave me tea, coffee, biscuits, dates, and he had the incense burning with the Arabic aroma, and I was treated like a king. So he got my passport, sent it down, got a stamp, and just before we left the meeting, he gave me his business card, and when he gave me this business card, it said Sheikh Fawaz El Sabah, ambassador to Bahrain from Kuwait. And he was a member of the royal family.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Okay.
That's awesome.
So he had a lot of power. They call it wasta in the Middle East. Anyway, so we departed and we left on good terms. And then I had to go back to the embassy of the Saudi Arabia because I needed a transfer visa to go there. So I took all my documents and gave it to him. And I knew it was going to take, they told me it's going to take a couple of days and I'd be in the crowd waiting over there. And so during that time, I started touring all over Bahrain and learning customs and learning the foods and listening to the language and laying back and just observing and trying other things. So I toured the whole little island of Bahrain. So in that 3 days, but when my paperwork came out, I got prepared to go to take my journey. And I put all the papers together and packed up my clothes. And then I went to a car rental place and I rented this little tiny Fiat, about 2 inches big and 1 inch wide. And it was old and it was just a toot, toot, toot. And that was gonna be my transportation to Kuwait. So anyway, I rented the car, filled all the stuff, my clothes in there, and got my map. I had studied the map for 3 days, how I'm gonna get there, blah, blah, blah. And so I took off from the hotel. We went down to where you have to cross the bridge. That's a causeway in Arabic, that's what they call it. The bridge is between Bahrain and Dhahran, Saudi Arabia. So at that bridge, I had 2 checkpoints. And they checked all the paperwork and everything to make sure I was legal and all that. And they checked the car and they searched the car and everything was good, but it took like 4 hours because it was a queue to get through the bridge. And I checked in the hotel, and then the following morning after 10 o'clock, I had my breakfast and got up and got on my road on my journey towards the north to Kuwait. When I got out there, it was just like a 2-lane highway, and my little tuk-tuk is ready to go. And, so the sand is blowing back and forth across the thing and swirling. I got my little Fiat, and I'm going down the highway, and it's wiggling down there, and all of a sudden these Lamborghinis, Maseratis, Mercedes, BMWs, they come flying by me at 150, 160, like 200 miles. They were just, and blow my little teeny little tuk-tuk over to the side of the road, and I had to struggle back on. So I kept on going up the highway, and going up. And there were like 6 checkpoints, and at each of those checkpoints, they checked my paperwork, checked the car, searched the car, make sure all my documents okay, and then they searched the car and let me go. And 6 checkpoints. On the 7th checkpoint, which is the border of Kuwait, I went to that last checkpoint, waited in the queue. I finally got in and met this Kuwaiti officer and told him I wanted to go to Kuwait and gave him my paperwork. And he went in the office, came back and had a little nasty attitude and told me, well, you can't go to Kuwait. You don't need to be there. We don't want you in there, and all kinds of negative stuff. He really had an attitude. So I said, oh my goodness, now, boy. And the first thing I thought about, I said, oh my God. And he told me go home. And I said, oh my God, I got to go home. I done came 6,000 miles, got on the other side of the ocean. I'm at the gate, and now you're going to shut the gate on me. Anyway, I thought about it and got in desperation. So I reached in my wallet and pulled out the card of Sheikh Fawaz Al Sabah. And I showed it to him and gave it to him. When he got it, oh, mashallah, you're welcome. You saved my country. You go in your house, your country, my country. And then so much went through, and he stamped my passport, and I drove off at like 12 o'clock at night in the middle of the dark, going up a lonely highway with nobody out there but me. No lights, no street lights. No, I'm driving up there for about 20, 30 miles. It's pitch black except for a little bit of shadows off on the outer perimeters that you could see something, and then you could see the shadows. Some camels walk by, and then you see the bullet holes in the road. My car started hitting bullets, and you hear the little ping, and they fly out. And after a while, I had to stop the car, get some water, and clean out the oil that started to rain on the car. And I'm going up this road, and I'm saying, oh my God, I don't know where I'm at. I'm out here. And if something happens, I'm going to a war country, and I could get killed out here and disappear. I hadn't talked to my wife since I left Bahrain. I had no communication. The phones wouldn't work. So
were you scared? Like, did you think about turning?
I got concerned, and I got kind of frightened. I started talking to God. I started oh, Jesus, why am I out here? What did I do if I lost my mind? I'm gonna die here. Anyway, I kept going down the highway, and finally I saw all these little 2-story buildings, and they were all black, and still no traffic coming. And then I looked over on the left, and I saw all these little matchsticks out there glowing, like hundreds of them. And those were actually the oil well fires that I told you about how big they were. But they looked like matchsticks from where I was going down the road. Anyway, I kept going, and then started seeing cars with glass out, and then the tires were missing, and then you see buses turned over, and then cranes bent that way, and you keep going, you still don't see no people, no cars, nobody's going my way, nobody. I done went about 40, 50 miles now, and I'm starting to see little bigger buildings, like 4-story and 5, 6 stories, and then all of them are black. There still ain't nobody out there. I didn't see no police, no firemen, nobody walking on the street. I was scared as hell by that time. That took a lot of fear. That fearless man, that guy you talked about, I was at the end. I landed downtown in Kuwait City, and I'm riding around, and I see all the storefronts, every glass window is broken out. There's glass on the sidewalk, streets are torn up, chunks of buildings laying on the ground, and I'm riding around, and like I said, I didn't see nobody. And I'm riding around for about 10, 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden, I saw this American Humvee go by. And on the door, it had the logo of the Corps of Army Engineers. And I said, oh, wow. And so he kept going, and I got right behind him, and I followed him. We went up in this little street. And when we got up in the street, he pulled in and parked, and I pulled over and parked right beside him. So I parked beside him, and I got out the car, and I said, listen, my name is Lionel Gittens. I'm a general contractor. I'm from New Jersey, and I'm looking to get some contracts over here, and I need to know, where's Colonel Crucio and what military base is he on? The guy looked at me, and he had a little smirk on his face, right? So he says, okay, Mr. Gittens, why don't you follow me? And I said, okay, I'll follow you. So we walked across the street, went into the lobby of this hotel, and the lobby from the outside, you see where smoke is out on the building, and the lobby on the inside was all full of terrible smell. You know, the furniture had been burnt, the curtains had been burnt, there was smudge all over the carpets, and the carpets had been burnt. And over in the corner, you see 2 people behind the reception desk with a candle lantern. So anyway, the guy took me, and we went right by that and went right straight into some elevators, and he pushed the 10th floor. We come out on the 10th floor, and I walk into a brand new building, a brand new office, all painted up nice and everything. And it's beautiful, nice furniture. And the guy takes me over to the receptionist and said, hey, this is Mr. Gittens, and he wants to see Mr. Colonel, Mr. Crucio. And the lady said, well, and then I gave her my book and introduced myself, gave her my brochure. And she said, well, have a seat. And I said, okay, no problem. So I sat down, and she went inside this little office, came back. And then she told me, follow me. And I walked in that office. And when I walked in the office, here's this guy in uniform, in military uniform, US military uniform, with the Colonel Colonel logos on his shoulder, you know what I'm, insignias. And he had a few ribbons and all that. And he's sitting behind the desk. And when I looked on the desk, whose name was it? Colonel Lucrucio.
That's amazing.
6,000 miles away. And can you imagine how God manipulated and opened each door at each second? I only had to miss the guy driving the Humvee by a minute or two. He could have been on another street, and my whole history would be different. When you think about it, I flew 6,000 miles over the ocean and met a man that took me to the ambassador that gave me a card, and that card got me through the last checkpoint in Kuwait. I skipped the part, the little Fiat. I wasn't supposed to take it over across any bridges or any country without the owner's permission. By God's grace, he blinded all those people inspecting that car for all those checkpoints. And I took that car into Kuwait and bought it back when I got hired by Bechtel.
Wow, that's amazing.
You know, that's a God miracle. That's
Yeah.
like finding a needle in a haystack on the other side of the earth where you've never even been.
Exactly.
I stayed in Kuwait for another 8 days running around. And then I went to Bechtel and they gave me a Godfather offer for a job. They told me, Mr. Gittens, we're going to give you this massive amount of money for working in the oil field and the fires. We need you. Which department? They said you should run the HVAC department, heating, ventilation, and air team. So I became the superintendent of the HVAC department 8 days after I got in country. And in that's what my sitcom is about. Because my sitcom is about me keeping God busy from age 5 to age, I ain't got that 80 now over.
But tell us, you know, how you got into this part where you like, hey, I'm going to write and tell my story and create a sitcom.
Want me to do it in 2 words?
No, I want more than 2 words.
Okay, but I'll give you the first 2 words.
Okay.
COVID-19. Second country, Kuwait cannot get it. Virus is rampant, still there. And I'm in Texas and I sat here for a year and a quarter and said, you know, I need to tell my story because I was told by like 200-300 people around the world. I went to 54 countries. I've traveled to, and people, I tell pieces of my story and they say, you need to write a book. You need to tell your story. So now that I had that time on my hands, I started writing about my history. And I've never written a book or anything like that in my life. You know, I'm a contractor. I'm a hands-on, fix this. You know, you got something broken in your house, you want something creative. We also do interior design. So I love, that's the part of things that I love so much, is being able to take something and beautify it with your own hands. And then when you get done, you just stand back. And I've done projects 50, 60 years ago, and I can go back today and look at those projects, they're still standing.